What happens when humanity's greatest strength becomes its greatest weakness? When years of careful planning meet the one variable no algorithm could predict. In the depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall on the edge of a blade, humans have earned a reputation that makes even the most advanced species whisper warnings to their young. We are the species that doesn't know when to quit, the ones who turn impossible odds into victory songs. The race that looks at a trap designed to kill gods and asks, how do we make this work for us instead? But what happens when a human sets a trap so perfect, so meticulously planned, that even he believes it cannot fail? What happens when weeks of preparation, backup plans for backup plans, and contingencies mapped to the smallest detail meet something no human strategist ever considered? What happens when an alien girl, innocent and lost, simply walks into a web designed to catch apex predators? This is the story of humanity's most methodical hunter, whose greatest triumph was supposed to be the capture of the War Council. Instead, it became the moment he discovered that sometimes the universe has plans that dwarf even human ambition. Sometimes the hunter adjusted the microresonator for the 15th time, his calloused fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon. The device hummed quietly in his palm, no larger than a coin, but capable of disrupting neural networks across a 3-kilometer radius. 3 weeks of planning had led to this moment. 3 weeks of studying patrol routes, communication frequencies, and behavioral patterns of the most feared military council in the Andromeda Spiral. The abandoned mining station on 442C had been chosen for good reason. Its maze-like corridors provided countless escape routes, while its depleted energy signature made it invisible to most scanning systems. More importantly, its proximity to the neutral zone meant that any distress signals would take hours to reach either human or space. Had spent 2 weeks modifying the station's infrastructure, turning maintenance shafts into sniper nests and cargo bays into kill zones. You magnificent bastard," he muttered to himself, a habit he'd picked up during his years as a lone operative. "They'll never see this coming." The War Council consisted of 5 beings, each representing a different aspect of their military doctrine. There was Supreme Commander Han, whose tactical brilliance had crushed 3 human colonies in the Outer Rim. Strategic Coordinator, whose psychological warfare techniques had broken the spirit of entire populations before a single shot was fired. Battle Mistress, whose personal combat skills made her a legend among warriors. Intelligence Overseer, who seemed to know human movements before humans made them. And finally, Cultural Analyst Era, whose understanding of human psychology had helped craft the propaganda that turned human civilians against their own military. Together, they were responsible for the deaths of over 2 million humans. Separately, they were brilliant. Together, they were unstoppable, but had found their weakness, the one flaw in their otherwise perfect coordination. They trusted their technology too much and their instincts too little. The mining station's central hub had been transformed into a technological nightmare. Every surface was covered with sensors, projectors, and communication jammers that had painstakingly calibrated over the past week. The would enter expecting to find a routine intelligence gathering point, a small human outpost they could eliminate quickly and quietly. Instead, they would find themselves trapped in a maze designed by someone who had studied their every weakness. Checked his chronometer. The strike team should arrive within the hour. His intel suggested they were traveling in their standard formation, a modified cruiser with enhanced shields and a complement of 40 warriors. More than enough to overwhelm a typical human outpost. Far too many to escape once his trap was sprung. The beauty of the plan lay in its simplicity. The would detect what appeared to be a small human research facility studying the abandoned mine. Their scans would reveal exactly what wanted them to see: a handful of life signs, minimal defensive capabilities, and valuable intelligence data ripe for the taking. They would send in a small strike team while their main force remained in orbit, standard protocol for such operations. Once inside, the real game would begin. Had spent weeks studying psychological profiles, and he knew they would split into their standard formation. 2 teams of 5 would secure the outer perimeters, while the War Council itself would proceed to the central hub to retrieve the intelligence data. They would expect resistance, but not the kind had prepared for them. The first surprise would be the gravity generators. Had modified them to create pockets of altered gravity throughout the station, turning simple corridors into 3-dimensional battlefields where up and down became meaningless. The adapted to standard gravity environments would find themselves disoriented and vulnerable. The second surprise would be the holographic projectors. Had programmed them to create false walls, phantom enemies, and impossible geometries that would turn the station into a psychological maze. They prided themselves on their analytical minds, but even they would struggle to navigate a world where their senses couldn't be trusted. The third surprise would be the neural disruptors. Unlike crude electromagnetic pulse weapons, these devices targeted the specific brainwave frequencies used by neural implants. Every member of the War Council relied on these implants for enhanced communication and tactical coordination. Without them, they would be reduced to simple verbal communication, destroying their greatest advantage. But the real trap that was most proud of was the quantum isolation field he had hidden beneath the central hub. Once activated, it would prevent any form of faster-than-light communication or travel within its radius. They would find themselves cut off from their ship, their reinforcements, and any possibility of escape. He made his way to his command center, a modified storage room that provided an excellent view of the station's main corridors through a network of hidden cameras. His weapons were laid out with military precision. A plasma rifle for long-range engagement, a particle beam pistol for close-quarters combat, and an old-fashioned carbon steel knife that had been his grandfather's during the First Contact Wars. The irony wasn't lost on him. His grandfather had fought with crude ballistic weapons and pure determination, would defeat them with technology they couldn't even comprehend. It was a fitting evolution of human warfare, adapting and improving until even the most advanced enemies became manageable. A soft chime from his detection grid indicated an approaching vessel. Felt his heart rate increase, but his breathing remained steady. Years of training had taught him to channel adrenaline into focus. This was the moment he had been preparing for since the massacre at Colony 7, where his sister had died along with 50,000 other civilians. The cruiser appeared on his long-range sensors exactly as predicted. Its sleek, organic curves were beautiful in their deadliness, like a predator evolved for perfect killing efficiency. Watched as it took up position in high orbit, well outside his weapon range, but close enough to monitor the situation below. A smaller craft detached from the cruiser, dropping toward the planet's surface with the fluid grace characteristic of technology. Counted 25 life signs aboard the landing craft, exactly within the range his intelligence had suggested. The War Council was taking this seriously enough to come personally, but not so seriously as to bring their full military might. I'm perfect. The landing craft touched down approximately 2 kilometers from the mining station, close enough for a quick assault, but far enough to avoid any defensive systems they might expect. Watched through his external cameras as the strike team emerged, their forms barely visible through the planet's perpetual twilight. Even at this distance, he could identify the members of the War Council by their distinctive armor and movement patterns. Supreme Commander hand moved with the mechanical precision of a career soldier, every step calculated and purposeful. Strategic Coordinator seemed to glide across the rocky terrain, her sensors constantly scanning for threats. Battle Mistress moved like a predator, her hand never far from her weapon. Intelligence Overseer appeared almost casual, but knew the was processing dozens of data streams simultaneously. Cultural Analyst Era brought up the rear, her attention focused on a handheld device that was undoubtedly analyzing every aspect of the human facility. The standard warriors accompanying them were impressive in their own right. Each stood nearly 3 meters tall, their exoskeletons providing both protection and enhanced strength. Their weapons were integrated into their armor, creating a seamless interface between warrior and technology that had terrorized human forces for decades. Activated the first layer of his deception. External sensors would now detect what appeared to be a skeleton crew of humans attempting to evacuate critical data from the mining station. Life signs moved in predictable patterns throughout the facility, creating the illusion of panicked researchers trying to escape before they arrived. The strike team responded exactly as predicted. They split into 3 groups. 2 squads moved to secure potential escape routes, while the War Council and their elite guard advanced directly toward the main entrance. Their confidence was evident in their relaxed formation. They believed they were hunting frightened humans, not walking into a trap designed by someone who had spent months studying their every weakness. Activated his recording systems. When this was over, He wanted the galaxy to see exactly how the infamous War Council had been brought down by a single human with too much time to think and too many reasons to hate. The propaganda value would be enormous, but more importantly, it would send a message that humans were done being victims. The reached the station's outer perimeter and paused. Watched Supreme Commander hand gesture to his subordinates, undoubtedly issuing orders through their neural network. They would be coordinating their approach, sharing tactical data, and preparing for the standard human defensive responses they had encountered countless times before. They had no idea they were about to face something completely new. The outer doors of the mining station slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the dimly lit corridors beyond. It would appear that the humans had already fled, leaving behind only automated systems and skeleton crews. The perfect invitation for overconfident predators. They smiled as the first warriors crossed the threshold. After 3 weeks of preparation, countless hours of planning, and more backup scenarios than he could count, the trap was finally being sprung. In a few hours, the most feared military council in the galaxy would be either dead or in human custody. Either outcome would send shockwaves throughout space and prove that humanity was far from finished. The War Council entered the station with the supreme confidence of apex predators entering familiar hunting grounds. They had done this hundreds of times before, sweeping through human facilities like death itself. But this time, death had been waiting for them, planning for them, preparing for them with the methodical patience that had made humanity the most stubborn species in the galaxy. They checked his systems one final time. Everything was ready. The trap was perfect. Nothing could go wrong. He had no idea that at that very moment, a young female was approaching the mining station from the opposite direction, lost and confused after her transport had crashed in the planet's northern hemisphere. She had been walking for 2 days, following the only artificial energy. The first sign that something was wrong came from Sector 7, a maintenance corridor that had converted into a monitoring station. His motion sensors detected something approaching from the north, moving slowly and erratically across the rocky terrain. The signature was definitely, but it was alone and appeared to be injured. They frowned at his displays. This wasn't part of the plan. The War Council's strike team was already inside the facility, working their way toward the central hub exactly as he had predicted. His traps were functioning perfectly. Supreme Commander Han's team had encountered the first gravity anomaly and were adapting with typical efficiency. Battle Mistress had nearly walked into his holographic maze, but had detected the deception just in time. Everything was proceeding according to his carefully crafted scenario. But this new contact, this single figure stumbling across the planet's surface, represented a variable he hadn't accounted for. Pulled up the external cameras and zoomed in on the approaching figure. What he saw made him pause. It was definitely but unlike any he had encountered before. Where the warriors inside his facility moved with deadly precision, this figure stumbled and swayed with obvious exhaustion. Its armor was different, too, lighter and less aggressive in design. Instead of the dark, predatory colors worn by military personnel, this individual's clothing was a soft blue-gray that seemed designed for comfort rather than intimidation. More puzzling still, the figure carried no visible weapons. Every had ever studied was armed to the teeth, their bodies bristling with integrated technology designed for warfare. This one appeared to carry nothing more threatening than a small pack and what looked like a civilian communication device. The individual was clearly female, her movements possessing the flowing grace that distinguished women from their male counterparts. She moved with the determined stride of someone who had been walking for a very long time, occasionally stopping to check her direction against a handheld navigation device. He felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the sensation he always experienced when a perfectly planned operation began to develop complications. He had spent 3 weeks accounting for every possible variable, every potential deviation from his predicted scenario. He had contingency plans for reinforcements, backup scenarios for equipment failure, and alternative strategies if the War Council detected his trap before it could be sprung. But he had never considered the possibility of a random civilian wandering into his perfectly orchestrated battlefield. Through his internal cameras, watched the War Council's progress. They were exactly where he wanted them, moving through his maze of modified corridors toward the central hub. Supreme Commander Han was beginning to suspect something was wrong, his tactical instincts finally overriding his confidence. strategic coordinator was analyzing the station's layout and finding inconsistencies that didn't match their intelligence reports. Intelligence overseer was attempting to access the station's computer systems and discovering security measures that were far more sophisticated than anything a mining outpost should possess. In approximately 15 minutes, would activate the neural disruptors and begin the final phase of his plan. The War Council would find themselves cut off from their technological advantages, trapped in a facility designed specifically to exploit their weaknesses. It would be the most significant victory against forces in human history. But the approaching civilian threatened to complicate everything. Zoomed in closer on the external feeds, studying the young female's face. Even through the grainy resolution of his surveillance equipment, he could see that she was injured. There was a dark stain on her left shoulder that looked like dried blood, and her movements suggested pain with every step. Her expression was one of desperate hope, the look of someone who had been lost for far too long and finally saw the possibility of shelter. She was heading directly for the station's main entrance, the same route the War Council had taken. In her current condition, she would arrive just as was implementing the most critical phase of his operation. The timing couldn't have been worse. He found himself facing a dilemma he had never anticipated. His mission was clear: eliminate or capture the War Council and deal a devastating blow to enemy morale. The success of this operation could shift the balance of the war and save countless human lives. He couldn't allow anything to interfere with that objective. But the approaching figure wasn't a warrior. She wasn't a threat. She was simply a lost civilian who had the misfortune to stumble onto a battlefield at the worst possible moment. Ed checked his chronometer. The War Council would reach the central hub in 12 minutes. His traps were primed and ready. The quantum isolation field was charging to full capacity. Neural disruptors were positioned at strategic points throughout the facility. Everything was perfect. Except for the young female, who was now only 500 meters from the main entrance. Through his internal cameras, watched intelligence overseer suddenly pause in his advance. The head tilted in a gesture that recognized as intense concentration. After a moment, turned to Supreme Commander Han and began what appeared to be an urgent conversation. They felt his blood run cold. Had they detected the approaching civilian? Were they coordinating with an outside agent he hadn't been aware of? His intelligence reports had been very specific about the War Council traveling with only their standard escort. There had been no mention of additional personnel or civilian assets in the area. The external cameras showed the civilian female had stopped approximately 300 meters from the entrance. She was studying her navigation device with obvious confusion, looking back and forth between the device and the mining station. Her body language suggested uncertainty, as if she wasn't sure this was the destination she had been seeking. They made a decision that went against every instinct developed through years of military training. He activated his external communication array and transmitted on standard civilian frequencies. An unknown individual approaching the mining facility. This is a restricted area. Please state your business and intentions. The response was immediate. The young female looked around in confusion before raising her communication device. Hello, is someone there? My transport crashed 2 days ago in the northern region. I've been walking ever since following your energy signature. I'm injured and need assistance. Please, I'm not military personnel. I'm just a student trying to get home. Her voice carried none of the cold authority associated with warriors. Instead, it held the trembling exhaustion of someone who had been pushed beyond their limits. There was genuine fear in her tone, but also relief at finally making contact with intelligent life. I stared at his displays in disbelief. A student, a civilian student whose transport had crashed, leaving her stranded on a planet that happened to be the site of the most important military operation of his career. The statistical probability of such a coincidence was so small as to be essentially impossible. Yet here she was. What kind of student? Asked, buying time while he tried to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. From the University of Zephyr Prime. I was part of a research expedition studying pre-contact civilizations in this sector. Our ship suffered a critical failure during routine navigation. I was the only one who made it to an escape pod before the main drive exploded. I felt something cold settle in his stomach. Was the study of extinct civilizations, a field that required extensive knowledge of multiple species, histories, and cultures. If this young female was telling the truth, she represented exactly the kind of innocent civilian that humans claimed to protect in their propaganda broadcasts. Through his internal cameras, he could see that the War Council had resumed their advance. They were now less than 2 minutes from the central hub, completely unaware that their carefully planned operation was about to be complicated by factors beyond their control. They faced an impossible choice. He could proceed with his mission, activating the neural disruptors and quantum isolation field as planned. The War Council would be trapped and eliminated, achieving his primary objective. But the civilian student would be caught in the crossfire, potentially killed by systems designed to target military personnel. Alternatively, he could abort the operation, allowing the most dangerous military council in space to escape in order to protect one innocent life. The opportunity might never come again. Millions of humans could die because he chose to save a single enemy civilian. Please, the young female's voice came through his speakers again. I can see there are others nearby. Are they part of your facility? I don't understand why everyone is being so secretive. I just need medical attention and a way to contact my university so they can arrange transportation home. Others nearby? She could detect the War Council's presence but didn't understand their significance. Realized she had no idea she was walking into a military operation. To her, this was simply a mining facility where she hoped to find help. The War Council reached the central hub. Watched Supreme Commander Han examine the chamber with growing suspicion. The commander was beginning to understand that this was no ordinary human outpost. His tactical experience was telling him that something was very wrong with the entire situation. Had perhaps 30 seconds before Han ordered a withdrawal. If he was going to activate his trap, it had to be now. His finger hovered over the activation control for the neural disruptors. One push, and the most significant enemy victory in years would be his. But the young female was still approaching the entrance. In her weakened condition, the neural disruptors might kill her. Even if they didn't, she would be trapped alongside the War Council when the quantum isolation field activated. She would become a prisoner in her own right, guilty of nothing more than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He closed his eyes and tried to think like his grandfather, the man who had fought with primitive weapons but never forgotten that the goal was to protect humanity, not simply to kill aliens. What would the old man have done when faced with the choice between military victory and innocent life? The answer came to him with painful clarity. His grandfather would have found a third option. His fingers flew over his control interface, rapidly reconfiguring systems he had spent weeks perfecting. Instead of activating all his traps simultaneously, he began a selective shutdown that would allow the civilian to enter safely while still maintaining his tactical advantage over the War Council. The civilian approaching the facility transmitted, "You are cleared for emergency medical assistance. Enter through the main airlock and proceed directly to Medical Bay 3. Do not deviate from the direct route to that location. There are hazardous areas throughout the facility that could be dangerous to civilians." "Thank you so much," came the relieved response. "I can't tell you how grateful I am. I thought I was going to die out here." We watched her stumble toward the main entrance, her relief evident in every step. At the same time, he tracked the War Council's progress through the central hub. They had discovered his sensor network and were beginning to understand the scope of the trap that surrounded them. He had perhaps 2 minutes before they attempted to escape. 2 minutes to reconfigure his entire operation around a variable he had never anticipated. 2 minutes to find a way to complete his mission while protecting an innocent life. For the first time since this operation began, was truly improvising. And despite the chaos it represented, he found himself smiling. This was what separated humans from other species. When confronted with impossible choices, they didn't calculate probabilities or follow standard protocols. The young female, who had identified herself as, stumbled through the main airlock just as Supreme Commander Han discovered the hidden sensor cluster in the central hub. Watched both events unfold simultaneously on his multiple displays, feeling like a conductor trying to manage an orchestra where half the musicians were playing different symphonies. Moved through the entrance corridor with the careful steps of someone fighting exhaustion and pain. Her injured shoulder was worse than had initially thought, and she was leaving small drops of blue-tinted blood on the metal floor. Her navigation device beeped softly as she followed the route had provided to Medical Bay 3. Meanwhile, in the central hub, the War Council had shifted into full tactical mode. Supreme Commander Han was issuing rapid orders through their neural network, while Strategic Coordinator began analyzing the facility's modified layout. Battle Mistress had drawn her weapon and was scanning for threats. Intelligence Overseer was attempting to hack into the station's computer systems. Cultural Analyst Era was studying the human modifications to the facility with obvious interest. Realized he was watching two completely separate scenarios unfold in the same location. On one hand, he had a desperate civilian seeking medical assistance. On the other, he had the most dangerous military council in space discovering that they had walked into an elaborate trap. The two situations were about to collide in ways that his 3 weeks of planning had never anticipated. The medical facility located, transmitted weekly. I'm approaching Medical Bay 3 now. The automated systems appear to be offline. Is there anyone who can provide assistance? I checked his internal cameras and saw that she had indeed reached the medical bay. The automated systems were offline because he had deactivated them to prevent the War Council from accessing the station's full capabilities. But that meant couldn't receive the treatment she desperately needed. Through his speakers, could hear Supreme Commander Han's voice as the commander communicated with his orbiting ship. The conversation was in military code, but's universal translator was sophisticated enough to provide a general translation. Orbital Command, this facility has been extensively modified beyond standard human mining operations. Recommend immediate extraction of all ground personnel. Repeat, recommend immediate extraction. The response from orbit was immediate and chilling. Ground Command, extraction is not possible at this time. Long-range sensors detect massive energy buildup around your location. Your position appears to be surrounded by some form of containment field. They felt a moment of satisfaction. The quantum isolation field was working exactly as designed. They were trapped, cut off from their ship and any possibility of escape. His trap was functioning perfectly, even if the circumstances were far more complicated than he had planned. but was also trapped now, caught inside the same containment field that held the War Council. Her innocent presence had just become a major complication in what should have been a straightforward military operation. "Hello," called out through the medical bay's communication system. "The medical equipment won't respond to my commands. I think I need help operating your human technology. Is anyone there?" He found himself in an impossible situation. He could activate the medical bay's systems remotely, but doing so would reveal his presence to the War Council's monitoring equipment. Intelligence Overseer would detect the system activation and trace it back to his command center. His carefully maintained tactical advantage would be eliminated. But if he didn't help her, might die from her injuries. The blood loss appeared to be more severe than he had initially assessed, and physiology was different enough from human that he couldn't be certain how long she could survive without proper medical attention. Through his displays, watched Supreme Commander hand-split his forces into search teams. They had realized this was a trap and were now hunting for the trap's architect. Their movements were methodical and professional, covering every corridor and chamber with military precision. In less than 10 minutes, they would reach his command center. He made a decision that went against every tactical principle he had ever learned. He activated the medical bay's emergency systems remotely, providing with access to basic life support equipment while simultaneously painting a target on his own position. The effect was immediate. Intelligence Overseer's head snapped toward a wall-mounted display as his monitoring equipment detected the system activation. The began typing rapidly on his portable interface, tracing the command signal back to its source. "The medical systems are online," transmitted to. "Emergency protocols have been activated. Follow the holographic instructions for basic wound treatment." "Thank you so much," came her grateful response. "I don't understand what's happening here, but you may have just saved my life." Through his cameras, watched her begin treating her shoulder wound with supplies from the medical bay's emergency kit. Her movements were careful but confident, suggesting she had some training in basic medical procedures. Most students received such training as part of their survival education. Meanwhile, Supreme Commander Han had reached some kind of decision. He gestured to his subordinates, and watched the War Council begin moving in a coordinated pattern toward the station's outer sections. They were preparing to breach the quantum isolation field from within, using their combined technological capabilities to create a weakness in the containment system. Realized he had perhaps 5 minutes before they succeeded. The quantum isolation field was powerful, but it wasn't designed to withstand a coordinated assault by 5 of the most brilliant military minds in space. Once they escaped, they would call down orbital bombardment on the entire facility, eliminating both the trap and its creator, but would die in that bombardment. An innocent civilian who had done nothing wrong except seek help in the wrong place at the wrong time. And checked his weapon systems. He had enough firepower to engage the War Council directly, but doing so would mean abandoning his tactical advantages. His traps and technological superiority would be meaningless in a direct firefight against 5 elite warriors and their escorts. But maybe that was exactly what the situation required. I had been thinking like a hunter, using patience and preparation to create the perfect killing ground. But the presence of had changed the fundamental nature of the problem. This was no longer about hunting predators. This was about protecting the innocent while still achieving his mission objectives. It was time to think like a human. Activated his personal equipment and began moving toward the central hub. His plasma rifle hummed with lethal energy, and his armor systems came online with soft electronic chimes. After 3 weeks of careful planning and remote manipulation, he was finally going to confront the War Council face to face. But first, he made one more transmission to the civilian in Medical Bay 3. This is the facility's security officer. There are hostile military forces in this facility. Remain in the medical bay and do not attempt to leave until I give you the all-clear signal. The bay's defensive systems will protect you, but only if you stay exactly where you are. Hostile forces. His voice carried confusion and growing fear. I don't understand. This is a mining facility, isn't it? Who are these hostile forces? Are they human military? I paused in his advance. She still didn't understand what was happening. In her mind, this was a simple case of seeking medical attention at a civilian facility. The concept that she had wandered into a military operation targeting her own species hadn't occurred to her. The hostile forces are military personnel, transmitted carefully. This facility is currently under attack. You are safe as long as you remain in the medical bay. The silence that followed was longer than had expected. When finally responded, her voice carried a different quality, a mixture of understanding and fear that made chest tighten. The military, but why would they attack a mining facility? Unless there was another pause. This isn't really a mining facility, is it? You're human military, and this is some kind of military operation. He found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to explain his mission to someone who was technically his enemy, but didn't feel like an enemy. She felt like someone who had stumbled into a situation far beyond her understanding and deserved at least a basic explanation. This facility is currently hosting a diplomatic meeting between human and representatives, lied smoothly. The military personnel you detected are part of a security detail that has gone rogue. I am attempting to protect the civilian representatives until help arrives. It was a comfortable lie, one that explained the situation without revealing the true nature of his mission. Would understand being caught in the middle of a diplomatic crisis. She would cooperate with security protocols designed to protect civilians during military incidents. I understand, she responded after a moment. I'll stay here and won't interfere with your security operations, but please be careful. If those are rogue military personnel, they're extremely dangerous. Almost smiled despite the gravity of the situation. She was warning him about the danger posed by her own species' military forces. The irony was almost too much to process. Through his displays, could see that the War Council had reached the outer sections of the facility and was beginning their assault on the quantum isolation field. Supreme Commander Han was coordinating the technical aspects, while Battle Mistress provided security. Strategic Coordinator was analyzing the field's structure for weaknesses. Intelligence Overseer was attempting to hack the field's control systems. A cultural analyst Era was studying the human engineering principles behind the containment technology. Working together, they were making rapid progress. The quantum isolation field was beginning to show stress fractures where their combined assault was focused. Estimated he had perhaps 3 minutes before they achieved a breakthrough. The 3 minutes to reach the central hub and engage 5 of the most dangerous military minds in the galaxy. The 3 minutes to protect an innocent civilian while completing the most important mission of his career. The 3 minutes to prove that humans could find a way to do the impossible when everything they cared about was on the line. Checked his weapons one final time and began running toward the central hub. It was time to show the War Council what happened when they threatened someone under human protection, even if that someone was one of their own people. They found a way to save everyone. She could detect, hopping to find help from any intelligent species willing to offer it. She had no weapons, no armor, and no idea that she was about to walk into the most elaborate trap ever constructed by human hands. Her name was, and in 37 minutes, she would change the course of galactic history simply by knocking on the wrong door. Mimi's the hunted. Sometimes the trap becomes a door. And sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy is a human who realizes he's been thinking too small. The galaxy was never the same after that Tuesday.